everyone, and we are happy to have everybody joined us today. My name is Dr. Salman bin Naim, and I'm working as Associate Professor at Department of Library and Information Science, the Islamia University of Bahawalpur. We are going to organize this webinar in collaboration between Department of Library and Information Science and Sir Sadiq Muhammad Khan Library. And what a morning it is shaping up to be, and I'm very exciting for this topic and have insightful conversation and discussion. We have our esteemed panelists with us, and I would like to introduce them to you. We have with us Dr. Naresh Agarwal from Simon University, USA. We have Dr. Norazora Mohammedia from International Islamic University, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and Dr. Muhammad Umar Shafiq from Carleton University, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the participants who are on site and online as well. On site, we have the faculty members from the Department of Library and Information Science, and as well as the distinguished LIS professional from Sir Sadiq Muhammad Khan Library. I welcome you all. And as for our participants who have joined us online, I would like to also extend a very warm welcome to them. So thank you for joining us in the war again, fake news. So we are going to have this webinar on from pandemic to infodemic, how to fight disinformation and fake news. Here, I would also like to thank our worthy Vice Chancellor, Engineer Professor Dr. Atar Mehboob, who has provided us the opportunity to go ahead and organize series of workshops. Obviously, the credit goes to Professor Dr. Rubina Bhatti, who has led us and combined us, the library and the department. And we have taken the initiative under the leadership of Professor Dr. Rubina Bhatti. So welcome address. I would also request to her to give her welcome address.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salman. On behalf of the Department of Library and Information Science and Sir Sadiq Muhammad Khan Library, I warmly welcome all my esteemed speakers. Dr. Noora Zora from International Islamic University, Malaysia, Dr. Naresh Agarwal from Siemens University, US, and Dr. Umar Shafiq from Carleton University, Canada. I'm so happy that you have joined us today for addressing very important issues from pandemic to infodemic. And obviously, it is very important for us to address this issue on the forums of library information science and different libraries. When I initiated this idea to conduct this webinar from my department and the library, so I've been asked if whether it may be the subject of the media studies. So my answer was obviously that is the part of the media studies as well. But as the authentic information disseminates from the forum of libraries, so this is the best forum to address this issue today. We live in the age of information era, and we need information for every segment of life, either it is education, either it is economic, political, or the health issues. And we have seen that this is the first pandemic in the history for which social media and information technology is being used widely for keeping people well informed, safe, connected, and being productive. But at the same time, we have noticed that this is the social media and ICT is being utilized for spreading some fake or disinformation or misinformation, which is undermining all global efforts in this regard. So I hope our speakers will give their valuable talk to address this issue. I think we should start our event without delaying anymore. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Rubina Bhatti, for welcome address. So it's a fact that fake news is spreading faster than the virus itself. So we have to look at it. Therefore, we have combined together a panel of experts from three different part of the world to share their insight on fake news and let us know how to prevent and fight to the fake news. So our first speaker is Dr. Naresh Agarwal. Before inviting to him, I would like to introduce him. Dr. Naresh Agarwal is currently the president-elect of ACIT. He is an associate professor and director of information science and technology, concentration at the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons University, Boston. Naresh research area in information behavior and knowledge management. His first book, Exploring Context in Information Behavior, Seeker, Situation, Surrounding, and Shared Identify, was published by Morgan and Claypole in 2018. His second book, You Know the Glory, Not the Story, 25 Journey Toward Ikigai, is coming out in 2021. He has been a keynote invited speaker at workshops and conferences in different countries, including in the US, Japan, France, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and South Africa. Naresh has held various leadership positions at the Association of Information Science and Technology. He was a member of its board of directors, co-chaired its annual meeting in 2017, awarded the ACID James M. Creator Leadership Award in 2012. As I mentioned earlier, that currently he is the president-elect of ACID. In 2018, he started an initiative which I like the most. In that initiative, he gathered human stories to through interviews to inspire other human stories. So we've invited Dr. Naresh as a panelist, and he's going to give a talk on from pandemic to infodemic, how to fight disinformation and fake news. Thank you, Dr. Naresh, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salman. So I'm going to share my screen now. I think
Yes,
it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
yes. All panelists can share their screens now.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen. So as we all know, like since more than a year now, or a year basically, we have been in the midst of this pandemic, and especially vigorously since March or so. And then there was a word coined around the same time called infodemic, which was seen as dangerous or more dangerous than the pandemic itself. And that's what forms the theme of this webinar series today. And so it's a big challenge for us, as Professor Bhatti mentioned and Dr. Salman mentioned earlier, is how to fight disinformation and fake news. And it really requires the entire information science community coming together and also engaging our students in leading this fight so that as a general population, we teach people to become more aware consumers of news so that we are able to see the good from the bad and the correct from the incorrect. So my name is Naresh Agarwal, and thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Salman. And here, my contact details are given at the bottom over here. So this is the area of study of information science that I typically operate in, the interaction between humans and information and technology. And this space is largely, I think, the space occupied by the entire field of LIS or information science as such. So this is a brief introduction to my research area. So at the heart of it is the actor or the user, and it could be a conference attendee, a working person, a fake news consumer, or a critical thinking advocate, or a student, or a child, or a person sitting on a webinar right now in person in Bahawalpur, or people connecting online from different time zones. And the person might have a need for information, which might come about either due to work or because of curiosity. And when that happens, the person starts looking for information, which could be from other humans, going to the library, asking for the reference desk, or to friends and colleagues, or for books from the library. And it could be from online based and computer based systems. And sometimes we find information serendipitously when we're not really looking for it. And as this information comes in, we try to make sense of it. Some of it makes sense, and we sometimes we avoid information, and that's part of my research area as well. I look at how do people feel when their WhatsApp and messenger messages or any other types of messages and calls are not responded to, and also based on this entire field can be seen as part of information behavior or knowledge management. And I wrote a book on context, which gives rise to information need. And knowledge management is similar to information behavior, but it's looking at the entire phenomena from an organizational point of view. So one of the things over here is that the information that comes in now through any of these sources, we do not clearly know whether that is information or misinformation or disinformation, whether it can be trusted or not. So this sense-making step has become increasingly critical now. It is not just about finding information based on our need, but also being able to see whether the information is credible and reliable. So this was the book that you alluded to, Dr. Salman, earlier, and this is the book on exploring context and information behavior. So this came out in 2018, and this is a link for the book. And this one is I'm almost done with it. I have 4 stories left to edit now. I'm 21 stories already, and hopefully they should be done pretty soon and sent to the publisher. So let's talk about the phenomena that we have about disinformation, fake news. Here we have all of these different terms. The term propaganda is there, hoax, and then rumors, and so on. So right now, like at the moment, in the last few years, we have been talking about misinformation, and since like 2016 or so, or 2014 onwards, like we've been talking about fake news and so on. But propaganda has existed as a term for a very long time, and this has been used by governments. This has been used by different agencies, and in day-to-day lives in towns and villages, we hear the term rumors, or in Hindi or Urdu, you might call them afwahein. So you have as an afwa, like the things have been these have been around for a long time. People spreading things which are not really true. So this was a quote by Hugo Mercier about fake news at the time of coronavirus. So he says that in times of crisis, misinformation abounds, and things like COVID-19 can be cured by ingesting fish tank cleaning products, and coronavirus was developed in Chinese or American or French labs, and then Cristiano Ronaldo and the Pope tested positive, and so on. So all this was fake. And there were various stories which are coming in from South Asia as well, that you can have garlic to cure fake news, or you can have boiled water that will cure, that will cure COVID, or you can do various kinds of home-based treatments to cure COVID. Even now, I have people on my Facebook where they claim to cure COVID using homeopathic medicines and so on. So now the fact is that 80% of the people who get COVID uh, will recover on their own, even if you do not have those medical treatments. It's about the people who get more seriously ill where there's this big threat. But there's a lot of false information about this, and now as the vaccine is coming out and being launched in various parts of the world, there is a lot of fake news and misinformation coming out about vaccines as well, about some vaccines which are not effective, about claiming to be effective, and some vaccines which are effective, about claims that those are killing people and so on. So in order to fight this pandemic in a more sustained manner, it becomes very, very important for us to really realize what is true, what is not true, and how we can all come together to fight this virus based pandemic that we are in the midst of. So this was a video that I created last year in March in Hindi, and I realized that in order to reach the larger number of people, I call this video like coronavirus se kaise jeet sakte hain. So this was one attempt to try and reach a large number of people, and it was very widely shared. A lot of people shared this among friends and family, but that was my attempt at that point in time to really try to bring about the importance of social distancing and hand washing and some of the very basic things which people were not believing at that point in time. And this is again looking at the same model that we saw earlier, but then now the role of disinformation that is coming in instead of information. So there are a few terms. There is this term disinformation, there is the term misinformation, and there is the term fake news. And there are some differences in the term. The firstly, when you say fake news, right, it does not apply to information in general. That is applying to news items that are spreading. Whereas disinformation and misinformation are more general terms which can be applied to any kind of information, including news items. So when we look at false information, right, the false information could either be misinformation or disinformation. So when there is like a false connection or misleading content that can be seen as misinformation. So sometimes when we have mistakes or errors that we introduce in a writing, that is also misinformation, basically just false information. And when there's an intent to harm, that is often termed malinformation. So things like harassment or hate speech, leaks, and so on. But when these two come together, when the false information and intent to harm they come together, that is when we reach this term, which is disinformation, which can be manipulated content or fabricated content, imposter content, or false. So basically, it is wrong information. It is false, but there is also some sort of a bad intention behind it. So disinformation, in that sense, is dangerous. And there are certain related terms to it. There's rumors, urban legends, spam, trolling, and so on. And there are other typologies of this as satire or parody. And these are, again, this is kind of a common category between mis and disinformation for these. So for satire and parody, there's no intention to cause harm but has potential to fool. Then there is misleading content. There's misleading use of information to frame an issue or an individual. Imposter content when genuine sources are impersonated. And fabricated content when new content is 100% false, designed to deceive and to do harm. And what we find now is that increasingly, as we see in social media, there are lots of videos on YouTube and on sometimes on Instagram and other sites as well, where you take some pieces of information which are true, and then you take some pieces of information that are false, and then you put together speeches. Like sometimes I've seen people take speeches of politicians and other people, and then they pick and choose parts of the speeches and they make a separate thing, and then they make it go viral, because then that's spread by a large number of people, and then people start forming a false impression of that person, not because of what the person said was true, but because of the way false information was spread about that person. So here you can have a false connection. So like when headlines, visuals or captions don't support the content. So this often happens where there's a separate picture or a separate story, but the wrong context is provided to it, like a false context when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. And then when there's manipulated content, when genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive. So I find a varieties of these in different ways now around us very commonly. And sometimes when I've tried to confront people with this, especially on WhatsApp groups, one response that I've received is forwarded as received. Basically, they would say that even if you point out that something is misinformation or it's false, they would say that, oh, I just forwarded whatever I received. And that is where I think we have to be very careful, because while we might receive false information from various sources, when we forward it to any, even into one single person, then we become responsible, at least as part of the spreading of false information. And we cannot just say at that moment that, oh, I just forwarded whatever I received. I think it is an individual responsibility for all of us at that point to be very active consumers of information, so that we are only forwarding things that we know are genuinely true. And in one of the studies, they found that even if let's say you find something that is shared and that's false, and you point out to the person that this was false, even if you're not able to cite supporting evidence right at the moment, because that's a lot of work every time to cite, to dig for sources to cite based on why something is false. But studies have found that that really works. So just pointing out that something is false actually has a dramatic impact in slowing down the spread of false information, even if you do not go to the extent of finding contrary sources to prove that that information was false. So who are the authors of this false information? It can be people wanting to make money, it can be satirists, untrained journalists, or it can be partisan people who are trying to influence people in a particular way. So this was a figure from my book on context. I talk about the identity theory over there. And there is basically, we find that there are like this is looking at people as individuals, as human beings first on a personal level. And the second way is when we see people as part of a group, when we see people based on their race, their religion, or their gender identity, or based on their nationality, or based on their research area or profession or body type or anything. So when we try to look people as part of a group first rather than as individuals, then really we are really not seeing the individuals. We're trying to see people as part of bubbles. So this is sort of an intergroup identity where we see people as part of a group or outside of a group. And this is people looking at human beings as human beings, like interpersonal as in groups. And this was a quote by Rabindranath Tagore, and he was a Nobel laureate, and he wrote the Gitanjali in 1913, for which he got the Nobel Peace Prize, and he Nobel Prize in Literature. And he wrote that we are in a haste to seek for general types and to overlook individuals. So this problem has been at least for more than a century now, or perhaps even earlier than that, because we find some of that in Shakespeare's writings as well, that people have always tried to generalize people based on some common traits rather than looking as human beings, because we often change over a period of time. So why this understanding this is important? Because a lot of the fake news is spread to spread hate or to spread prejudice based on this identity of people belonging to a circle, based on some stereotyping based on race or ethnicity or skin color, age, gender, sexual preference, disability, religion, profession, and so on, and not looking at as people as people. So one of the things that I found in my research in this is that there is a certain reality, and then there is a certain competing narratives to reality. Like even in the case of India and Pakistan's history, I found that what is taught in history books to children in India and what is taught in history books in children in Pakistan are often two very different narratives about the very same event. And one of the things that I started doing a couple of years, I think many years ago when I was in university in Singapore, was that started reading Indian newspapers, but at the same time I started going to dawn.com and other newspapers in Pakistan. And I also started looking at newspapers from Kashmir, and to try to understand that from the same narrative, you could see different narratives coming out depending on who is publishing the same news report. And you'll find the same thing in terms of news reports about Tibet and coming from China from different perspectives. You find the same things coming from left versus right in the US from the Democrats versus Republican narratives, and in Fox News versus CNN and so on, and in various media in India as well. So it is about like from where, depending on your point of view, various narratives are put forward. And sometimes we grow with those narratives, we grow with those stories because we hear them at home, we hear them in our societies and our communities. And by the time we grow up, a lot of the times those things form a very strong value system in us. And we tend to believe things which agree with the narratives. And then we tend to disagree things which do not agree with the narratives. And that is why when the news comes about, whether it is fake news or propaganda, it is very, very easy to get people to believe in that, because if there is a certain narrative which is being peddled and then people fall for that narrative, then the false information gets planted, and people sometimes, even if when you give them contrary information, they find it very hard to believe in that case. So these are some very simple examples saying that, okay, my need matters more, or the needs of other people matters more, or we become stronger by being selfish, or we become stronger by sharing, or ethnocultural nationalism is important, or civic nationalism is important, or society is more important than individual, or the individual is more important than society, or science is more important than religion, or religion is more important than science, or things like girls in fairy tales need a prince to rescue them, or a more feminist perspective is girls don't need a prince to protect them. So there is all of these are differing perspectives, and depending on what is said or put forward based on a certain perspective, people will tend to fall for that, depending on what our inherent biases can be based on the narratives that we have grown up with, or narratives that have been part of experiences shaping us. So there is a bending of news and social media towards particular narratives, and there is left versus right, liberal versus conservative, and then you often find that both the sides are then sort of accusing each other of propagating fake news or false information. But at the same time, one of the when I gave this talk or a similar talk in a different forum, one of the attendees came to me and said that I must call out that one side is more wrong than the other. I should not say that both sides are equal in terms of trying to call out the light for the other side, because they, it is possible that one side uh, is spreading more false information than the other side. And sometimes you find that a particular party is spreading like 70% of false information, the other side might be spreading 3 to 5% of false information. So the intensity of spreading of this information might differ based on which side you are in, or depending on which party is in power in which country at a certain point in time. So, what are the implications of all this? I think the very big implication which we need to understand is that people actually end up believing disinformation as truth. And I find that it has nothing to do with education, that increasingly more and more educated people, as well, people who you thought were very learned or very respectable, you find that they are peddling false information, not because of anything, but because there's so much of propaganda around them. It is coming from all the sides, uh, all the sites that they visit, all the news channels that they watch, that after a while they start thinking that whatever is being told to them is actually the truth. And this belief in false information happens especially when there is enough repetition. So it has been found in various studies that the more you repeat false information, that people over a period of time start believing that that is actually the truth. And that is a big danger. And that is where the fight for disinformation becomes much more difficult. So how do the false information spreads? So one is that earlier there is this two sort of a tug of war between the social part of it and technology side of it. So there was earlier it was all people, communities, and all of that, and then technology came in, and now we are in a sort of a phase which is called the socio-technical society, where we live, where we use technology to form our social connections through Facebook and Twitter and through Instagram and WhatsApp and so on, through various kinds of channels. So there were various phases in this evolution of a socio-technical society. So this is from one of the papers that uh, from Isa Yanke, and that Professor Sandar Dalis Isa and I, we did a follow-up paper for the ACES conference. So in the first phase, it was mainly trust-based virtual communities and like Wikipedia in 2005. In the second phase, around Wikipedia in 2010, there were clear rules and conventions. There were mainly socially enforced network of policies. In the third phase, there was like additional rules, like Google page ranking algorithm came in and loan algorithms and so on. And what Isa says is that we are now in the fourth phase of the socio-technical society, where the society is interfused with cross-action spaces. So you have humans working on the one hand, and you have bots working on the other. And we are not able to tell the difference very well, that are we interacting with humans or are we interacting with computer algorithms and bots? So there is a lot of spreading of misinformation by bots. So there is a mixture of manipulation of algorithms happening, and supported by money flowing and political influence and so on from different sectors. And that is why we are in this dangerous phase right now, where the society is interfused with dynamics of cross-action spaces. So that's why we are in this evolution towards a socio-technical society. So communication is happening through various channels now, and there are lots of various types of messaging tools. This was a graphic from 2017, and top messaging apps by countries. So this is here you find that in South Asia it's WhatsApp, and then in the US and North America it's Facebook Messenger, and and there are other tools as well, like WeChat in China, and then depending on which country you are in, you have various tools that are used more often. And this was a very recent statistic, and this was most popular global messaging mobile apps as of July 2019. So yeah, this was like about a year old. So this is based on number of monthly active users. So WhatsApp had like 1.6 billion active users at that point, and Facebook Messenger had about 1.3 billion active users. WeChat had about 1.1 billion active users. And so yeah, so this is a recent one. This is from October 2020. And these are the most used social media platforms. So Facebook has 2.7 billion users, YouTube has 2 billion, WhatsApp has 2 billion, and so on. So, and these are all the social media platforms that we have. So this is looking at 1 minute in 2020. What happens in one internet minute? So you have 1.3 million logins in 1 minute, 19 million texts are sent on the iOS messaging, 4.7 million videos are watched on YouTube. So all of these kinds of things are happening within 60 seconds. Now the question is, of all these 1.1 million logins happening and there's web searches happening, there's 19 million texts and 4.7 million videos watched, and then these are the scrolls on Instagram and tweets, and 2.5 million snaps and in 1 minute, and 49 million messages sent on WhatsApp and Messenger and so on. So if we really understand the scale, all this is happening in 1 minute, right? We really don't know that how much of this is true information, how much of this is false. So the scale of the problem that we're dealing with is very, very high in that sense because of the intensity and the amount of information that is being transmitted within a very short period. So there is the ease of copying, pasting, sharing, and seeding on sites to entice into sharing. There's a role of bots happening. So then the question comes in, why do we believe false information? And one of the main reasons why we believe false information is because of this concept called cognitive bias. And there is this bias or this prejudice which impairs our thinking. And if we analyze ourselves, we'll find that most of us are victims of cognitive bias in one way or the other. Sometimes we find that people do not care about big amounts of money, but care about very small amounts of money. So there is a lot of irrational thinking that we do as human beings. So when you look at objective facts, right, that is on one side, and then we look at facts which conform to our beliefs based on the narratives that we have grown up with. So what you see is not objective facts. We tend to see those objective facts which agree with a value system and a way of thinking. And that is the cognitive confirmation bias that we need to be careful about. And we can have confirmation bias in various areas. And the way to fight confirmation bias is to train people in critical thinking. And the more people you interact with, like in this forum today, we have people. You have the guest speakers from, let's say, from the US, from Malaysia, from Canada, and you have participants from South Asia. So when you have all of these people from different value systems, different countries coming together, that actually provides us forums to check our confirmation biases and to get to know things which we may or may not agree with, but actually it helps us grow. The more somebody challenges a confirmation bias, the more those things make us uncomfortable, but they also help us grow. So what is happening is that there is this news from media which is fitting in with our biases, and we follow certain media based on our way of thinking, and we have our own ingrained cognitive biases. And then our social medias and contacts are feeding us images, text, videos that conform with our biases. So when all of these come together, our own biases are certain very small subset of media channels and sources that we follow, and the news which keeps barraging us with information, then we turn into something called an echo chamber. And so here you have targeted ads and personalized data, and so we start living in a bubble. So we have people that we work with or interact with are those with the same beliefs, and then the same ideas, and so it gives rise to something called filter bubbles. Now, if I'm to explain this in Hindi or Urdu, it would be Kuएं का मेंढक. Because if you've heard the story of Kuएं का मेंढक, it is basically the story of the frog in the well. So the frog in the well lives in a well, and sometimes one day meets a frog from the sea or the ocean, and then says that, "Oh, is the ocean as big as my well?" And then the frog from the ocean says, "No, it's very, very big." But it's like, is it like 3 times bigger than my well, or 4 times bigger? Because the person in the well is not the frog in the well is not able to imagine how big the ocean is. And the sad part is that even now we are so connected, interconnected through technology, but we can still be like that frog in the well if we do not open ourselves to various other belief systems which are different from our own. And that is what is happening a lot, and that is why we become prime targets or victims for misinformation to be given to us. So what are the current efforts to fight misinformation? So libraries have information literacy programs, have lib guides. In social media, companies like Facebook and all, they're hiring fact-checking teams. or some companies are trying to disrupt financial incentives for having misinformation. Uh, Twitter has removed troll and fake accounts in a number of cases. And now that Twitter is also coming up with labeling some information as potential misinformation or false information. Google is coming up with ranking improvements, and certain media is coming up with easier reporting new tools. And certain governments also getting involved. Like, for instance, in 2018, there was a code of practice on disinformation where the European Union signed up with Facebook, Google, and Twitter about fighting disinformation. But some people were again concerned with this because, in terms of the government role of trying to control, because in terms of independence of the media, they would want to see that a third party would have control over this. And there are projects like the News Literacy Project, and then there is Critical Thinking, criticalinformation.org, which is a UK-based site for fighting fake news. So the question comes in as what can people and information professionals do to fight disinformation and fake news? And Dr. Salman, you earlier introduced the Project Oneness World that I started to interview people. And this is one of the interviews that I did with Professor Eileen Abels, who was outgoing dean at Simmons at that point in time. And we talked a little bit about this issue. So I just want to share that with you.
About fake news, right? And you mentioned critical thinking, and I've seen that increasingly more and more people people actually believe fake news as true. Yeah. And I think there's a great need to educate people on critical thinking. And how do you think information science professionals can come in trying to bring about this change?
I think that has to happen early in life. So by the time students get to college, I think it's late,
okay,
to unlearn. I think it has to start late elementary school, middle school, because I think that students, and that also has to do with careers. For example, we're trying to recruit more women into STEM, the science, technology, engineering, math. And that's difficult because by the time, even in high school, they get to high school, they've already made up their minds for other fields. So I think getting to students at a younger and younger age to get them used to looking and questioning information, because again, it's almost like design thinking, like, do I believe this? Is this what I want to believe? Is this true? And how would I know that it's true? This was going on for a while when you would do a search and you would get a .com in your URL, right? Yeah. And you think, oh, wait a minute, that isn't what I was looking for. I was looking for the government, a government agency, which could give me the answer to this. So even back then we were told to do quick checks in that way. Now it's gotten much more difficult, particularly with video and film, that you can change something very easily and people won't know. So I think we have to start young and then continue throughout. But as you say, what studies have shown, that you say something to someone, if they want to believe it, they will.
Right.
And also there's a book, that about statistics, and you can lie with statistics.
Oh, yes.
So you could have a group of people around a table reading the same study and understanding it differently. Right, and that's never going to change.
Yeah. What do you think are your life lessons?
Yeah, so we'll stop this video here. And so that is one of the things that Professor Eileen Abels is mentioning over here is that the fight for fake news has to start very often. So sometimes by the time we're trying to target adults, it's already late. So it has to start from the school level, in high school and below, and at the college as well. But it has to start right from the school system, because the narratives can become very ingrained by the time you grow up. So it can be very difficult to fight those prejudices. So there is a need for critical thinking and action. So critical thinking, this ability to analyze, to reason, to problem solve, to evaluate, to make a decision. Basically, it's data-driven thinking, where every time somebody says something to us, we just see that as a hypothesis or a proposition, and we try to gather data or look for evidence based on what somebody is saying, rather than just believing something because somebody in authority is saying that. So to fight disinformation through critical thinking, training includes exposing individuals to the common characteristics of misleading information. So we have to show them patterns, more and more patterns in terms of how the misinformation is being spread. And as we get used to the pattern, after a while, people will start seeing that, okay, this is what is actually happening. And that can really open our minds in that case. And now in the schools in the US, I find that various schools are coming up with curricula. Libraries are doing that, where they're showing videos of people in terms of giving examples of images, examples of text and videos as to how false information is being propagated. So for people to effectively think critically, they must integrate newly discovered information on some subject onto their prior preconceived notions. So this is the narrative. Uh, this is the bias that we have, and then we get this new information. We must be able to align this new information with our biases and to see where do we get uncomfortable. And if we are not getting uncomfortable, which means that we are not really learning anything new. When we get uncomfortable, that is the room for growth that's happening at the moment, and that is the area that allows us to grow. And as more and more of this happens over a period of time, people learn to think critically. But for that, we have to train our children to question everything, and to be fearless in questioning. Because until people are afraid of questioning, then until that phase, we cannot really develop this ability of critical thinking and reasoning. So this questioning or inquiry, right? That is the main part. At the heart of media literacy is the principle of inquiry, asking. So you have this is from the Center for Media Literacy. You have awareness, analysis, reflection, and action in terms of the things that are important over here. So the ability to assess information from a variety of sources, to analyze and explore how messages are constructed, whether through social media, print, verbal, visual, or multimedia, and the ability to evaluate media's explicit and implicit messages against one's own ethical, moral, or democratic principles. So this is the very hard part, to really question ourselves, saying that what are my biases that are preventing me, that are making me either believe or disbelieve in this information. So questioning our own biases is one of the most difficult parts in this process. And expressing or creating their own messages using a variety of media tools, digital or not, and finally participating in a global media culture. So these are some of the skills that we want to impart in this fight uh, for media literacy. And the Center for Media Literacy has a certain principles. One is that all media messages are constructed, and they are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. And different people experience the same media messages differently. And media have embedded values and points of view, and most media messages are organized to gain profit and or power. So when we understand these principles and really understand this in a deeper level, I think that's when we start, it is beginning to fight this fake news in some way. So some of the things to think of is who created the message, what creative techniques were used, how might different people understand this message differently, and what values, lifestyles, and points of view are represented or skipped from this message, and why is this message being sent. And this is a very important infographic from IFLA, and it has been translated to various languages. So it talks about, and this is one infographic I think that we can pass on to a lot of people, is about considering the source, reading beyond, look for supporting sources, checking the author, checking the date, asking is it a joke, checking your own biases, and asking for experts as on the way to spot fake news. And there are various fact-checking websites. These are the ones from the US. And then there is a whole list of fact-checking websites on Wikipedia. So these are the lists based on different countries. So here we have, these are the fact-checking websites in Malaysia, for instance, and then the fact-checking websites in India and in Japan, Taiwan. So these are all in various countries, so a list of fact-checking sites. I found one site in Pakistan as well called factcheck.afp.com, AFP Pakistan. And so there are a number of sites based on countries. So whenever in doubt, I think going to the fact-checking websites to look for any news source to see whether it is true or false can be true. The other things what I found very useful is whenever you have some piece of information, go and check for hoax, that information, and hoax as a Google search. Whenever you see as hoax or false or fact check or something, then you'll start to see contrary information. And this was a paper that Sanda, Isa, and we did for ACES 2019 for serendipity and critical thinking. And there we said that disinformation, like sometimes when we find information serendipitously when we are not really looking for it, that can be used as a check for spotting fake news as well. And we said that it can serve as a syringe sort of to fight fake news. as a bubble, as a needle that injects surprisingly unexpected evidence into the echo chamber of filter bubble. Because serendipity is when serendipity happens, you find information by chance, by luck. Serendipity is when you're not really looking for it. So we can check at times based on, is this genuine serendipity, or is somebody planting this information in front of us for us to find it as if we have found it. And there can be tests at the individual level or the systems level that we discuss more in the paper. So that was one of the approaches to fight fake news. There are other approaches, and here, this was a paper, it's a working paper that I have with Faraj Al Saidi. Uh, and He's a doctoral student from Kuwait in Simmons University. And we had this as a short paper in the ASIST conference last year, and we have a working paper on this. But this was the model that we came up with as an information behavior framework on the fake news phenomena and ways to fight it. So there is a certain context to the whole thing in terms of the way information comes about, and there's a spread of fake news over time. Then you have the user's own intention or confirmation bias, and you also have the intentions of the creators and spreaders of fake information. And these intentions influence the algorithms, bots, and social media to deceive. And at the user level, when we see false information, we can try to look at that false information for reliability and credibility. At that moment, we can either decide to use it if we believe in that. If I see it as false, I can either ignore it. But a lot of times you find people forwarding or spreading that false information because their own biases inform that. If it is something which conforms with a bias, even if it's false, then they would either misinform or disinform using that information. And then there are these terms, depending on our, our own perception of whether the information is true or false. We can see the same piece of information is either information or misinformation or disinformation. So our own biases or our judging of reliability lets us see this information in that manner. And here, all of this is residing within our own filter bubble or echo chamber, where we have like that Cuenca Medic thing that I talked about earlier, the frog in the well. And the way to fight fake news then comes about using critical thinking and action, using more active advocacy, serendipity test, and information literacy and media literacy. So these can all be used to puncture the user's filter bubble and allow the user to open to multiple perspectives, which will help increase the creative thinking, critical thinking. But basically, it's about the research methods and skills that we teach in universities to PhD students. We need to impart those data gathering skills to people. So coming back to my earlier framework, here we have disinformation and serendipity and sense making. But critical thought and action becomes really important over here in the sense making process. And when we're looking at the sources, we must be able to evaluate the reliability of sources. So thank you. So that was what my thoughts on fighting this phenomena is at the moment. And I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh, for a very wonderful presentation on how to fight disinformation. And I look forward to our participants for their constructive questions. So if any participants have any question, they can write it in the chat box or at question answer box, or even can raise their hand so I can take them for audio question.
Dr. Naresh, I wonder how we can overcome this cognitive bias
Yes.
being in the global cultural society.
What I found was that I went to study in Singapore in 1995. Before that, I grew up in Sikkim in the northeast of India. And when I went to Singapore, uh, and I was around 17, 18 at that point, and I found that a lot of things that I believed were not true. And especially when I started meeting people in terms of even my sense of history, in terms of things that were taught to me about certain historical events, when you start hearing the same things from different people from different perspectives, then your own biases start. Then your mind starts opening up, and then you start changing. In fact, I met somebody from Pakistan for the first time in Singapore at that point, and he was a PhD student there in the Nanyang Technological University. and then you start hearing different perspectives. And even with in terms of India and Pakistan history, when I started hearing perspectives of the person from Pakistan, and when I shared my own perspectives, that is where we both started growing in terms of what we knew and what we were fed growing up in a way. And so I think the way to check our own biases is to talk to different people. Firstly, to travel. I think travel is number one. But even when we're not able to travel, then having these kinds of Zoom sessions and having friends from different countries, I think, can be very helpful. And also reading books. I think reading books from by different authors from different countries, so that our mind opens up to various possibilities, and we don't just go with what we are taught growing up, because our parents, our teachers, our well wishers, they while they are all wishing well for us, but they all have limited information as well. So we have to open our minds more and more by interacting with people from all across the world. I think that is a good way to really learn and grow.
Yes. That's really true. Doing travels and meeting different people, that really makes difference to develop your really unbiased perspective. I remember I visited India in 2010, and I found them very loving, very caring, and very welcoming to me. So it's the same. Some things were there were things where we discussed, and we found that there isn't those elements exist that media is showing us. So it is really true when you travel and you meet different people personally. We don't find such elements that media is showing to different people.
Yes, I think so, because people are fed what they want to consume in a way. So a lot of
Yeah.
it is propaganda. A lot of it is for different audiences, for winning elections and so on. And when we start meeting people as individuals, right, we'd find that there isn't much of a difference at all. It's like there's a lot of similarity, in fact, much more than differences.
Yes, you truly indicated that elections and being in the authority, so they build some own perspective and they try to spread that misleading information. That's really true.
Yeah.
Other questions, please?
There is a wide question, I guess, asked by Ayaz Ali Lagari that, sir, how we can participate in global media culture?
Can you explain what do we mean by media culture, maybe?
Media culture at a broader level, at international media, how can we participate there from sitting locally here in some rural area of Pakistan? I guess that's what the sense of this question is.
Sometimes I feel that the best thing we can do now is to stop participating, switch off the TV, switch off the internet, and then you find that the world is all good. It is only when you read more that we start feeling that the sky is falling, and it is not, because a lot of the TV anchors are fighting against each other. They're trying to spread all kinds of false stories. They're discussing. All that they're trying to do is increase the TRPs. And if we really switch off the TVs, we find that the world isn't like going away. So I think more than participating in a global media culture, I would say that stay away from the global media culture, and just focus on what we can do on a day-to-day lives, trying to improve our surroundings, our communities where we are. So I think going local is more important than going global, I think, in my perspective.
Exactly, exactly. So I guess we don't have any further questions here.
I think there were some
So
questions on how to get the recorded material. I think
yeah, there are questions. I mean, participants are more interested having recorded video and your slides. So would you allow us to share your
yes,
slides and
yes,
video?
please, yes. And I would allow them to, in one condition, is that where they become advocates for fighting fake news as well themselves. I think
Yeah,
we need more and more people to join in this fight. So
this is what the objective of this webinar today.
thank you. So yes, please share the slides, and the talk is also being recorded, so you can share the recording as well once that is available.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh. Obviously, we have joined hands together to fight against fake news and disinformation. That's how we can win against this phenomena.
What are the challenges being faced by socio-technical society and how to overcome them?
Yeah, so the socio-technical society is basically a society where we are spending our days looking at our smartphones, right? Like we have a phone with us all the time, and that is a huge challenge because it is affecting our lives it is like a yin yang. It is making our lives very powerful in a lot of ways. It is connecting us in ways like never before. But at the same time, it is bringing up a lot of mental illness kind of issues. The spread of false information is happening really fast, and we're able to consume things. Even when somebody dies, right, now you find that there are 100 RIPs, rest in peace, rest in peace, rest in peace. And then the person moves on to a next post of somebody on some vacation and goes and likes and loves that post, writes a good comment. So the our emotion span is also like very, very small, because we are constantly scrolling all the time. So I think knowing when to put our phones down, knowing and knowing when to be connected, when to be disconnected. I think that part is very, very important, and that is a huge challenge. And one of the ways to do that is we can use a phone itself to help that. So that is why one of the studies I'm looking at is being more responsive to answering people's messages. Because when we don't answer, we are kind of spreading that, okay, we don't care. But we can show that love and care and concern for each other, compassion for each other, even while being connected. So I think there are small ways we can use social media to spread a more positive message, because a lot of people, they're spreading hate on the same time. So I think that we cannot deny that we are connected in this world in a socio-technical manner. In the times of COVID, it was very helpful, because suddenly when we could not meet people face to face, at least it gave us webinars, it gave us digital media through which to connect with people. So I lost my father to COVID last year, in September last year, and later my brother-in-law died as well. So there, what we I could not go physically, but we held Zoom sessions with the entire family, and that was very helpful when we could have Zoom gatherings for people. So that was so. So I think that is again what the socio-technical society is allowing us, but at the same time there are challenges. So I think we have to constantly navigate between the two ends of this.
Okay, Naresh, I have a question to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably would be the last question. That I mean, in the post-truth era, where socially constructed fact are underlying the real fact. Facts are being constructed socially. So, so what do you recommend? How can we make a fight against fake news in the post-truth era, where socially constructed facts are undermined the real facts? Facts are being socially constructed. If we look at the media, they sell the sensation. And if we look at our affiliation, whether it could be political, religious, so the things which appeal to our emotions can strike us more as compared to fact. Then how can we move forward in post-truth era?
I personally, I go back to basics. Like I think in Pakistan we have Bulleh Shah's poetry. In India we have Kabir. Sometimes when we go back to the writings of some of these people and poets and all that, we go back to the very basics. Like I think you have in Punjab, right? What is Dunya mein sare anne, which is like everybody's blind in this.
Yeah, we live in Punjab and it's also a land of poets.
Line of poets, right? So you have, I think,
Land of lords as well.
yeah. So I
Very rich
think
over here.
so going back to the basics, I think going back to our own culture, our own history, back to our own people, can really give us a lot of strength, I think, in order to fight this. So I find that we need to get to a place where we start building communities again with our neighborhoods and caring more. And in terms of the strategies, those are the same. In terms teaching people to care about each other, to value each other, and even when you disagree, let's say there are political differences I find within the same family. Somebody is from the left leaning, somebody is right leaning, somebody is from Democrat and Republican. I always tell people that these people are not going to come to you when you're in times of need. Your family and friends and your cousins and your neighbors will come for you. So one of the things which I try to do is sometimes I find some person who's close to me saying something really wrong. And the difficult part is, should I disagree and fight with this person and spoil my relationship? Or should I say, yes, everything you're saying is correct, and then embrace the person? So sometimes I think I find that I don't always argue, because it doesn't really serve the purpose. if I want to keep the relationship.
That's true.
So it is about when to argue, when to not. I think that's important. I think we have to keep the human values, human relationships alive, because the the moment we start arguing over some piece of news, right, then that is the purpose. That is the purpose of the propaganda, to make people fight with each other. And if we can defeat that by saying that I will not let this propaganda come in between you and me, even if we disagree on this. That doesn't really matter.
Obviously. Dr. Naresh, sorry, I'm going to take very quick question here. There's a question asked by Dr. Zubair. He's from actually media study.
Okay.
His question is that we know have citizen journalism. Then every citizen is bringing and sharing news on social media. Some of those news are based on sincere intention, but influenced by their personal biases or on their limited understanding. In that case, what is your advice for those citizen journalists or for those who become victim of such limited information?
I have found that there are people who have been completely brainwashed. There are people who are critical thinkers, and there are people who are on the verge of being brainwashed. So I typically don't talk to people who have been brainwashed, but I find people who are in the on the verge, then they can be shown different sources, and then they can be corrected. So when we talk about citizen journalists, right, it again depends on the value systems that they're coming up with. Some citizen journalists are purely trying to spread a certain propaganda. You'll find every Facebook post of theirs, every videos they create, everything, they might be peddling a certain prejudice. So in that case, all they're trying to do is they have a certain base. They're trying to get a number of YouTube followers or subscribers and all that. You cannot do much because they have an audience. And
Yeah, the matter of rating as well. They
yeah,
go for it.
they go for rating, they go for the Facebook, the YouTube money, the ads and so on. But if we are able to talk to them individually as people and say that we are trying to make a difference in the way we live, and even through our social media, as even when we become YouTube influencers, we can try to help people for the better rather than trying to spread the false information. Then I think we can talk sense into some people. And the more media sources that they consult rather than from one point of view, I think we can become more informed. The least we can do is, I think, show news articles side by side for citizen journalists. Okay, this is what this website is saying, this is what this website is saying, this is what this news article is saying, this is what news article is saying. The moment you put five sources together at one side, automatically you're allowing people to think in different ways, like to have a more informed thinking, rather than saying that believe only one source.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Naresh. It's always so wonderful having you with us, and it's always exciting to listen you on different topics. So today your presentation and talk was excellent and it's well received. So once again, on behalf of the Department of Library and Information Science and Sir Sadiq Muhammad Khan Library, the Islamia University of Bahawalpur, we would like to pay our sincere gratitude for your time. It's 1:30 a.m. In the morning at your place. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you will join us in future as well.
Thank you.
So you completely allow, you can leave this meeting now, and
No,
you
no,
can
no,
have,
but I would request you to stay with us.
yes. Last
Thank you
time,
for this inspiring talk. Everyone is sleeping in your home, so you are very comfortable at your place. So stay with us.
No, I think I'll sign off early today because I'm trying to correct my sleep cycle. But
yeah,
but thank you so much, and I will connect with Omar later. And very nice meeting you, Dr. Noor Azharat. I will get in touch with you as well. Thank you so much.
thank you, Dr. Naresh.
Thank you for the great talk. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, thank you. Bye, Dr. Somad. Bye, Dr. Bhatti.
Wonderful talk.
Thank
Indeed.
you.